everyone, it's Jessica, and today I am going to be discussing man. If you haven't already, please check out Jason and Candace's awesome videos. Jason kind of set the stage for us, and he talked specifically about food and memory. And Candace talked a lot about the self-preservation versus presence in the moment dichotomy that the main character, man, experienced. So there's a couple of things that I want to discuss that are separate from those discussions. It all kind of ties back to national identity, but there is this kind of sense in the book of having many different lives as opposed to just having one life that happens to experience many different things, as well as this sense of placelessness that pops up in the lives of different characters. And then finally I want to touch on the national identity that is mentioned throughout the book. So with this idea of many different lives, both Man as well as her third mother, Mama, both of them actually have many different mothers. Man, which she explains, I think, on the very first page of the book, she has the woman that birthed her, the nun that kind of found her, and then Mama who raised her. With Mama, she had her own mother, her birth mother, who died, and then she had what was labeled as her cold mother or her mangy mother. It seemed to me that these different mothers for both of these characters represented a lot more than just the kind of family ties that they did or did not have, but it also kind of represented those different homes that they wanted to have or tried to have while they were growing up. This really speaks to and reflects on the kind of multiple identities that immigrants tend to have when they move, especially to Canada, because there is this sense of we let you be who you are, you're allowed to bring your culture with you, but the fact that when Man shows up, she brings a lot more of her culture than her husband ever did to the streets of Montreal. That kind of makes her sound like a streetwalker. She was, as Jason and Candace have mentioned, she was a cook. So instead of looking at one single life as a kind of piece of string in which many different things happen to you along the way, these characters are kind of analyzed in this sense of having different lives, almost like cats have 9 lives, and these people are being presented as, you know, there was Man's time in Vietnam, and then there was Man's time in Montreal, and then later on in the book, her time in France. And then for Mama, there was her time as a child with her mother, there was her time with the cold mother, and the fact that her and her elder siblings were kind of begrudged for existing before her younger half-siblings. And then of course there's the time in Mama's life where she completely lost her identity and she became non, and she lived in the resistance camp, not really by choice, but simply because she was basically captive there. When he got up from our table, his steps to the door were uncertain, like those of a man lost between 2 worlds. He no longer knew if he was supposed to cross the threshold before or after a woman. He no longer knew if his words should be those of the matchmaker or his own. No one held it against him because he came from elsewhere, from a place where personal pronouns exist so that they can remain impersonal. This quote is one of the very first times that we actually meet Man's husband, who comes to Vietnam and meets a couple of women through matchmakers and with their families, and then fairly quickly decides that he would like Man to be his wife and move to Canada with him. This is also the first time we see what it looks like to be an immigrant coming back home. We find out that when Man moves to Montreal, her husband's kind of culinary taste is quite limited, and he is very pleased to just keep going with the very same special every single day. And like Candace mentioned, it's only when she shows up on the scene with her various different recipes that the restaurant actually does well, and she starts to expand not only her life but the life of the restaurant. For her husband, a man who was from Vietnam originally, to come back and to try and sink back in with those traditions and those customs and figuring out, do I call this woman aunt or mother or some sort of elderly relative? Like, how do I show my respect? Because he's lived in Montreal for so long and he has been away from home for so long that he doesn't really have a place anywhere anymore. So it really speaks to that sense of placelessness that a lot of immigrants and immigrant literature kind of speak to and use as recurring themes throughout the text. Finally, I wanted to speak about nationality because here at Hello Hemlock we did set up this channel specifically to look at Canadian literature, and we wanted to get a sense of answering that question, is there such a thing as Canadian identity? And especially when you read immigrant literature, it is very obvious how complex the notion of national identity can be. Something that is not as complex is the sense of nationalism, and that just means that essentially you are appreciative of your nation, you believe the kind of dominant ideologies of the day. While I really loved Man's story and her progression throughout the book, I was actually a lot more intrigued with the character of Maman, because you get to look at this character in bits and pieces and see what it's like to have a national identity and to be without one. Unlike her, most had joined the resistance of their own free will. She was ashamed of never having felt the same unconditional love for this country, which was hers as well. So when she's young, Maman is actually captured by the resistance army, and she lives not in any kind of torturous environment. She's not chained to a bed, she's not locked up anywhere. There's what she called these invisible boundaries. So I believe the resistance army that they're speaking about in the book is the one that went up against the French colonization back in the 1930s. Back in 1887, regions of Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand were colonized by the French Empire, and it was considered French Indochina. I did a little bit of research, and I'll leave some links below to some Wikipedia articles as well as a paper that I found very easily on Google. Maman's father demanded that all his children learn the poem by heart, because in it the poet depicted, among other things, purity and selflessness, two shades essential to the Vietnamese soul. I wanted to end on this quote because I thought it was probably the most fascinating sentence in the entire book. This is a very poetic book, and it's very beautifully written, and like Jason and Candace have already mentioned, it's just easy to read, but not because it's not heavy with thought and detail. Not only is this passage very beautiful, but it really reminds me of why we have this channel in the first place. Thúy has been able to put down on paper two elements that make someone Vietnamese, or make someone the ideal version of being Vietnamese. So I was immediately struck by the question, what would a Canadian say about this? If a Canadian was asked, what are the two essential shades of being Canadian, what would they say? I would really like to hear your thoughts, both on the book, if you've had a chance to pick it up, but also on the idea of what are two elements that make you American, or make you Canadian, or make you Vietnamese, or make you Australian. Please let us know if you will be picking up a copy of Man, and thank you so much for watching. Bye!